of time to remember all the souls who have passed through the world and all the saints who have passed through the world. And that night you get dressed up in costumes and go out to beg for candy and perhaps make trouble in the neighborhood. None of this made any sense to me. I I really broke with the Catholic Church over two serious to me issues. One was that I was a girl. I don't want to hear about the Catholic Church and its position on girls and women, but I was the prize winning orator in the state of Massachusetts in both public competitions and in Catholic competitions. And I can't count to you the number of times I was pulled aside and told that although I had won, it was more important for boys to plan for their future. I was the first girl in New England to win what was called then the Marion Medal, which was supposed to be the equivalent of the Eagle Scout Medal for boys. I worked on it for a year, but I was denied the chance to do meaningful work, be the cleaning lady in my parish church, because the Monsignor told me that girls did not belong behind the altar rail. Equity seemed to me non existent. The second issue was one I asked my father about. I wondered how some people were respected for their public volunteerism and their financial support of the church, when in private they were taking bribes, cheating on their wives, or drunk in public. And I asked my father, if a man takes bribes as a publicly elected official, how is that a model for Catholic belief? My father, not a regular church participant and not a church usher, this is a position of importance in my parish, said, well, sometimes the church had a blind eye to sin, and that sin happened when it suited those who observed it. And some people were punished for sin, and other people deemed important. Let sin slip by. What should be important to you, said my father, is what you have inside your head for living each day and treating people with respect. While I enjoyed his lesson, it seemed to me that sin had become elective. My walking away from the Catholic Church is probably not unusual. Stories abound of people who leave the church path by going to college, joining the military, or marrying someone, and discovering a wider world beyond their narrow church one. They discover a world of connectedness. Open eyes showed not so much the differences in the world, but the connectedness and interdependence. On all continents, weather affects people whose lives depend on growing season or river flow or tides. Around the world, pollution causes sick children, early deaths in families, or chronic illnesses. Outside the narrow church world, people begin to notice that rules don't always allow you to offer compassion to those you care about. How many religions ban LGBTQ plus people from sacrament services or serving as religious leaders? Religion based on strict rules of intolerance do not bring you to this deeper spiritual part of your being where you find yourself and acceptance of others who are like you or different from you. However, pluralism, remember, recognizes that difference can exist in harmony. I struggled with the meaning of spirituality. I know the dictionary definition of spirituality. A person is more connected to people than to things. And I understood that religion offered rules to guide your life, while spirituality offers a path not only to connect externally with others, but also to find an internal sense of peace and meaning. Unfortunately, even as a child, I liked rules and struggled with chaos. It took me time to accept pluralism and to walk away from the rules, to embrace a little chaos in my life. I drifted through college without regular church attendance and was a complete non attender by the time I went to my first graduate school, far from home. For my first graduate school degree, I had to do a project based in communication theory. I had a tape of a public speech by a famous person and constructed a project involving members of three churches: Methodist, Quaker, and Unitarian. And don't tell me those were the liberal churches in town. I know, but they were the only ones to volunteer their time one Sunday morning.
Mm.
I gathered a group of 8 to 10 people after their Sunday service, and I gave them a list of qualities to evaluate the speech they were going to listen to. Did the introduction get your attendance? I'm sure you know all these rules. Did the speaker present a main point? Did the body of the speech seem organized? Did the conclusion signal you that the speaker was at an end? Did you respond positively to the speech? I played the tape section from the public speech delivered by this man, and the general responses were that the speech was interesting, well written, had a point, and they really liked the speaker and would listen to him again. When we were finished, they asked who the speaker was, and I said Malcolm X.
Mhm.
The comments were, well, he didn't sound black.
Mm.
He's not educated. He's a radical violent Muslim. The purpose of the project was to see if our visual channel impacted our listening channel
Mhm.
or prevented people from listening. I thought listening to others was important, and I followed this idea through my later graduate school work, always trying to improve my own listening and my students' listening to others.
Mm.
Through reading and listening, I became convinced that every person of every culture, of every color, of every location of the world, past, present, and future, is a person of faith. Faith in self, faith in community, faith in the unity of the world, faith in man's ability to remember, to be ethical, or to practice the spiritual and corporal works of mercy I'd learned in elementary school.
Mm.
The spiritual and corporal works of mercy were necessary in the Middle Ages when you got groups of people together. It taught them how to live. The corporal works of mercy, however, are the basis for every social justice project you've ever seen. Feed the hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothe the naked, visit the imprisoned, shelter the homeless, visit the sick, and bury the dead. I began to ask myself if people walked away from their first religion, not because they wanted to look for another religion, but they wanted a place where their hard-won spirituality was valued. They had learned through living life that life is about relationships. For every sunny day, there's a storm. For every rainy day, there's a drought. For every birth, there is a death. For every joy, there is a sorrow. And for every sorrow, there is a joy. All these relationships happen to all people, regardless of their age, their color, their religion, their gender, their nationality, or any other perceived difference you can come up with. All of us celebrate births, deaths, weddings, coming of age, and learning achievements. The recognition of that similarity is the beginning of individual spirituality. Thus, I arrived willingly at the door of UU churches in this country and in Europe. I had faith that there I would be with people who believed in listening and accepting difference. In Europe, the UU meetings were more like covenant small group meetings, and you got together for worship, but you also got together to eat or to socialize and to talk. And it was in that intimacy that you develop the deeper connections that are not only personal, but spiritual. I wanted that intimate connection when I returned to live in the United States. And I found that you could grow it in a church community, even a large church community, as you bonded committees together to work for the same goal. I found it in a theater project in one church where the people became joined, united, and friends. I found you could build it any place, in covenant groups and in small groups. I suspect a focus on spirituality needs connection with yourself and with others. Connection is the community of shared values, and building connection is the mission of every UU church. I leave you with the words of a small boy who really gets being a UU. The following is an excerpt from articles by John Kokish, a Denver Post staff writer, and published around 1966. Enjoy. Unitarian boy ruled unfit to testify. James P. Wesley was sued in Denver court by his former wife, Nina Wesley, for custody of their 3 children. The father had received custody when they divorced. His attorney, Harry K. Nyer, Jr., attempted to call as a witness their 12-year-old son to testify that he wanted to remain with his father. The judge questioned the boy to determine if he understood the oath. "Do you understand what a lie is?" Judge Keating asked. "Yes." "And what will happen if you tell a lie?" "Well, if you discover it, I'd be in pretty bad trouble." "Suppose I didn't discover it?" "I would feel guilty." "Would you feel that you could tell a lie if no one could discover it?" "I don't think so." "Would you be punished if you told a lie?" "Yes." "By whom?" "Myself." "No, no, son. I meant if you told a lie, would you be punished for it?" "Yes." "By whom? Don't you believe in God?" "Well, we're Unitarians." Attorney Nyer then asked the boy, "You know the difference between right and wrong, don't you?" "Oh, yes." "Do you think that some person higher than you will punish you if you don't tell the truth?" "Yes." "Well, in your religion, what's that called?" "Well, in our religion, we mostly believe in science, and that's about it. And I don't know how to explain it really." "How about the power you refer to?" "Well, I don't really know." "Would you be punished?" "Yes, by my own conscience." "I don't think he's qualified," said the judge. "Step down, son."
Hmm.
During recess, Attorney Nyer contacted Reverend Richard Henry, pastor of First Unitarian Church, to explain Unitarian beliefs. Reverend Henry testified that the UU religion is non-creedal and offers no strict dogma. Every man is answerable to the highest truth within himself, which we call conscience, and others might call God. And like all citizens, we are answerable to the laws of society. Judge Keating said his decision to bar the boy from testimony was not based on religion, but on his idea that the child didn't understand the oath, which is, "You do solemnly swear by the ever-loving God and the testimony you are about to give in the cause now on trial before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." Attorney Nyer argued that Chapter 154 of the Colorado Revised Statute states, "No person shall be deemed incompetent to testify as a witness on account of his opinion in relationship to the Supreme Being or a future state of reward or punishment, nor shall any witness be questioned in regard to his religious opinions."
All right.
Case law in Colorado regarding the competency of minors under, understanding the meaning of an oath involves children under 10. In numerous cases, children as young as 6 have been allowed to testify. The former, Mrs. Wesley, testified her son would be 12 in April, and she told the judge she was positive his IQ was over 125 plus. That got me thinking. The judge decided to reverse his decision. "I think with an IQ that high, he understands the oath." After the boy testified, the judge allowed children to stay with the father, but liberalized mother's visitation. Dr. Wesley and his second wife founded the Unitarian Fellowship in Rolla, Missouri,
Mm.
where he was on the faculty. Today, that fellowship promises, "As Unitarian Universalists, we cherish the importance of individual thinking, respect for the conviction of others, the warmth of caring, the perspective of humor, the dreams of the mystic and the methods of the scientist, a way of life that avoids harm and scorn, a quest for justice through peaceful methods, a religion that is broad and encompassing, personal yet universal." Later on the newspaper's editorial page, there were 4 letters in favor of the boy's moral code based on love and insight. The judge's initial decision was condemned as illegal and unwise. Some people get that spirituality thing a whole lot earlier than I did.
Hmm.
Thank you.
Let's take a minute and think. For the purposes of the YouTube recording, I will be passing around the microphone to those who wish to ask a question. So, once again, Patricia, thank you so much. That was beyond my expectation. Meets
It's,
and exceeds
I was
expectations.
actually shocked the day I offered to do this because it must be age, but I'm not one for self-disclosure. Reflection's okay, but I don't normally do this. I'm much better at being a character than I am about being myself. So I do appreciate your patience and your kindness.
Yes. So, if you do have a question, raise.
Wait
Sorry.
back.
Yeah. Just a second. Raise your hand. I'll bring you the microphone. Please wait until you have the microphone to offer your question, and I'll try to do you in order, but sometimes I get out of order. Just
Oh,
hang in.
not to worry.
Good morning, Patricia. I have a question for you. I've had in my mind a long time, and I think you're the perfect person to answer it. I'm I sometimes wonder why we at All Souls Unitarian Universalists, why we qualify as a church. Your thoughts, please.
Long ago, we lived briefly in Kansas City, and we were members of Shawnee Mission. And one summer, they had a general meeting. We were going to vote on changing the name from whatever it was to Shawnee Mission Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, Shawnee Mission Unitarian Universalist Church, which became Smooch. And all the right number at the meeting and the right number of the quorum, and everybody votes to become Smooch. It is my memory that the Coven people, and they were a very active group, were absent from that meeting for some reason. And when they all returned in the fall, they were distressed at being a member of a church. And the then vice president of the board spent weeks, months with them individually, talking to them about what a church was and how when people gather under the big blue sky, they are a church because they gather together for one concentrated belief or purpose. So I guess my answer to that would be this is a church because you're all here for the same reason. And you want to spread that reason in an evangelical sense out to other people and make them welcome under this big umbrella of respect and tolerance and love. I don't know if that's your answer, but it may be mine.
You mentioned some experience with European Unitarian Universalism. I'm just curious, what were the circumstances that led you to live in Europe? How long were you there, and where were you?
Ah, the circumstance of living in Europe was that I decided to get married to a young man who had been telling me for the 6 or 8 months I'd known him when we got married that he was going to become a foreign service officer. And he actually checked books out of the library and gave them to me to read, written by all these former ambassadors' wives who wrote about their experiences. I don't think it crossed my mind when I got married by a Unitarian minister that that meant I was going to leave the country and not have a career. I had envisioned myself in some university, someplace in a nest, and I'd direct plays and I'd become part of a community and I'd really root. And as it turned out, I ceded the right to make a career decision to my husband and just moved with him constantly. He was is a macroeconomist in his head and was responsible for negotiation and treaties and various other upper level sophisticated things that meant we lived almost constantly for 20 years in Europe, twice in Belgium, twice in Germany. The time in France I didn't go because I wanted my son to spend a year in America and learn American. He spoke very fluent Brit, pidgin French, and pidgin German, but he found it funny when you put him with American children. And then we moved to London. And the answer to the other part of that question is I think relationships are a binary choice. You can have one or you cannot have one. And in my case, you can be married or you can be divorced. And as long as I never said, yeah, I want to be divorced, you just stay married and you learn to live with change.
Uh, you said you're a theater director. Was that a university setting or
I went
some
on
other
stage
setting?
first when I was 3. There is a picture of it. There's a picture of this line of little girls in white majorette costumes tap dancing, and they're all faced one way facing the camera, and at the very end there's this much smaller permanented child who's going this way going, oh. um I was trained to be an actress, and at some point my freshman year in college, I guess, um discovered that a lot of people were going to New York to audition. I had gone to a professional college, and I actually had a job when nobody else did. I'd been offered a job with a theater company in New York that was going to start a children's theater program, and they said, "Well, we'll hire you for the summer." So I actually had a salary, but I began to look at all my classmates who, wanted desperately to be in theater and were going to wait tables, and I I don't think that was my future. So yes, at that point I decided I'd become the very best children's theater director any university could hire. And I interrupted that class. That course was not going to happen. So I did other things to survive moving. I last performed in Santa Fe with a reading about a spiritual journey for 2 groups in Santa Fe that were looking to raise membership and money. Not my spiritual journey. No, does anybody know J.A. Jantz? Anybody a mystery reader? J.A. Jantz is a lovely woman who now lives both in Seattle and in Arizona. Um, and at one point wrote a book about her spiritual, actual journey. But she is a very, very popular mystery writer. I think she has 4 series and produced a book recently. But it was about the journey that she took to discover who she was and what was important to her and what her spiritual life was.
I'm interested in the idea you brought up about connectedness,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering how the European UU Church and the American UU Church approached connectedness, if if that makes sense.
Yeah, but we were all expats, so we came from different countries and different experiences. And at one point in Brussels, joined with another group because we didn't have enough kids for religious education. So my son started religious education in the Quaker program, and I guess it's that we were all so different. It was normal. When you become the minority in a group, when you are the only American on a faculty in Europe, or you are the only something in any group, or all of the people you're talking to are Europeans and you're not. I mean, you become very aware that you have to find some way to be part of everything. I have no idea if that answers your question. The Church of the Wider Fellowship, I think is what it's called. UU runs the Church of the Wider Fellowship. Is that it? Larger Fellowship. Larger Fellowship. And at one point, we actually had a minister who serviced groups in Holland and would come down to Brussels like every other month or something, or every other week.
To follow up on what Anita was saying, I think you once shared a story in a committee meeting that I was in with you, or after a meeting we had with Kendall, where you talked about what you're talking about now, where they would send you all packets
Mm-hmm.
as expats
Mm-hmm.
and send you the entire sermon and all the items. Maybe that's something that you could share with Anita and the rest of us again,
No,
because that's very interesting, I
I'm
think.
sure that they did, and there were times when you didn't follow the packet or something was important. I remember going to a meeting in Brussels right after they'd founded Now, the first chapter, and I brought with me a woman who was the founding member of the Dublin chapter of Now. And that's what meeting was about that day. We talked about women to the dismay of the men who were there who so yes, I think UUA has become even more serious in their guidance. Witness Soul Matters, the curriculum that was used this year for the small groups, because it also goes to the minister and to the RE director, and everybody's on the same page. A sort of giving you information, and then you devise what you want to do from it.
So I'm going to take moderator privilege and ask a question. Well, I have several. Again, I just want to tell you how much I really enjoyed what you said. So you were swimming upstream, both in the Catholic Church and basically as you looked at why females are treated and not treated the way they are. Um, what was the biggest roadblock you overcame?
Ooh. Nobody thought I was smart in high school. I was clever, talented, could do things. Nobody thought I was smart. We took, remember PSATs?
Yes.
Okay, we took the PSATs at the end of our junior year, trotted to Tufts University, took the exam. I had an almost perfect verbal score.
Hmm.
My math score barely scraped up. And my headmistress administered all the results and said to people, well, you see, we had already been subdivided into people who were going to secretarial school and people who were going to college. And I was in the upper level college class. Um, and then she called me up and she said, you've done very well. I assume you didn't cheat, but your math scores are just terrible. So you're going to take the SAT until you raise your math scores. And I'd been in math disability things for years. I'm dysgraphic. Kids look at letters and see them upside down, reverse, transpose, whatever. I do exactly the same thing with numbers. And sometimes if I'm really tired, I can do it looking at letters. There was no hope. I mean, they'd pushed me through math to the point that in fourth year math, you had to take in my college class, which was, I think, trig. I did math workbooks and back. I couldn't. It was just so beyond me. So my headmistress decided that I was going to go to a Catholic school. And she arranged visits, which my mother approved of, with Newton College of the Sacred Heart, which was the girls' part of Boston College. But it was very, very elegant with statues that had diamond rings on them and all the other Catholic schools. And I went and interviewed and got accepted. And I had also applied for admission to the college I was planning to go to and had gotten accepted with a half scholarship and a talent scholarship. So I wasn't worried about going.
This is the religious Odyssey. Is that what you
And
wanted
when
to come to?
the day came that you had to go to the headmistress's office and declare where you were going, I'd also won a talent scholarship to another college in Boston. I went and said I was going to Emerson. And she stood up, looked at me and said, "You will lose your faith."
Hmm. Hmm.
And for the only time in my life, I looked at her and said, if I can lose it that easily, it wasn't very well won. I think that the hardest thing for me to get over, other than stuff from my mother,
Hmm.
is I never thought I was smart.
Hmm.
I have 2 master's degrees, and it wasn't until my PhD where this absolutely spectacular man who was my tutor changed my life, not by getting me to the point where I could actually do the 3 years and get the degree, but because he taught me that I was of value,
Hmm.
that I had something to give. I had spent years teaching people how to teach children by saying to them, everybody has a voice. I don't care what's wrong with the person. They have a voice and you need to listen to it. They may have a voice now, they may have a voice 2 days from now or 10 years from now. But the only thing that's important is that you step back and listen to them and let them find that voice. Nobody had done that for me. So I think the ability to get to school, to move away from home, to find a path I was going to meander through, and finally get to a place where someone said to me, "Do you know you're of value? You have something to say in the world." And I went, "Okay."
Absolutely wonderful. I'm glad I asked.
As a person who's lived around the world, born in Massachusetts, how did you end up in Kansas City?
I stayed married. That really is the answer to the question. My husband decided to leave the Foreign Service. Someone had offered him a job that really interested him, and he went to London. And after I'd gotten everything organized in London and finally had a house and, had a thing I was happy with at the university and my life was going well, he said, "I'm going back to Kansas City. I think I know how to build and establish a new business and they're willing to finance it." And I went, "Kansas City?" It took me 6 months to leave London. And I did. And I came here. And when he moved on to the next job where he was going to create a business, we abandoned our son here. So recently we decided that we were old and 9 hours away was too far, and we moved to Kansas City again. And here we are. And this is it. Oh, yeah, except that Carl's going to be buried in a military cemetery. And it was Santa Fe because we moved to Santa Fe and we were never going to move again. And now we're going to be buried in Leavenworth. Leavenworth? Okay. Next stop. Not that anyone has the ability to predict their next stop. Close your eyes and just think between one day and another, if not for you, then for someone you know, something happens and life changes.
Well, I'd like to more tell something to you rather than, and then if you want to comment, but a number of years ago, the Catholic Church in the St. Louis area decided they were going to start having women who could be priests. And that caused quite a considerable thing. And so what we did here, the forum, is we invited the women who were trying to be priests to come and speak at a forum here. And then at some point they said, we really would like to be able to do a mass. And so we had a mass here. And I had a terrible time trying to figure out what to do and things. But that was something where we were attempting to to support people somewhere else. And so I'm wondering if you have what kinds of things you have tried to do or would like to see done with respect to women in some of the other religions.
Well, having recently been at a number of Catholic funerals, it's amazing to me that altar boys have disappeared and white-haired women are on the altar. I don't know if this is the answer to your question, but I'll tell you what I think is my funniest story about the Catholic Church. So I had this older cousin. There's 20 years between the first child in my father's family and my father. So everybody was older. He was the youngest and he had the youngest children. I loved my cousin dearly. Some years back, her husband of many decades had died. And that night she called her 5 children and their spouse to come to her house to plan the funeral. And she said, and his nephew is going to say the mass. And there was silence around the table as they all said, he's not a Catholic? She said, he is. He's a Russian Catholic, and that's all there is to it. He's going to say mass. So one of the 5 gets on her phone and Googles everything and says, oh, well, maybe. The Pope just in July issued a statement that Catholics are Catholics are Catholics, Greek, Russian, Roman, whatever. So they explained to the Monsignor that he's not saying the Mass, that the nephew is going to say the Mass. And the Monsignor says, has he ever said a Mass for the dead? Well, they don't know, but it certainly might not have been in English. Background on the story. The nephew had been in the seminary, came home one Sunday, went to a party, met a young woman who was home from her convent. They fell in love. He left the seminary, she left the convent. They get engaged, they get married, they have 5 children. Life goes on. The kids are all out of school. He's in his 40s, and he said, I've always wanted to be a priest. So they look up everything they need to know. This little couple from Massachusetts. They pack up and go to Russia. He becomes a Russian priest and comes back to Massachusetts and is given a Russian parish, if that's what it's called, in Gloucester or someplace up north. So they invite him down and they assign him a priest to shadow him because he's never read this in English. He's never done it in English. So we all sit there. The priest's mother was sitting in front of me, glowing. Her son is on the altar in the Catholic Church. I think over time, the Catholic Church, by necessity, has to become a little bit more flexible in its rules. I mean, how many people fast during Lent now and don't go to hell? How many people don't go to church on Sunday morning, but go at 6 o'clock on Sunday night or on television? Life is different. And will there ever be women priests? I don't know, but I can't predict the future. It is funny, though, to go to some Catholic service and little gray-haired ladies running around doing all the things altar boys used to do. Let me add that when one Catholic priest that was meeting here ended up stopping, they had a small amount of money left, and they voted it. They decided they wanted to give it to All Souls.
Yeah, we have time for one more question. If no one else has one, I will offer one again. Okay. You said something that really, really resonated with me, and it was the description of your project with the Malcolm X speech. Because what you said prior to that was that you were learning to listen and you were teaching people to listen. And that particular experiment, I think, illustrates the biggest barrier to listening, which is your preconceived notions of who the speaker is and what their agenda is, or whatever. Or you're sitting there in your mind coming up with witty responses or arguments against what they're saying. You know what I mean? You're not truly engaged. So to listen, one must open their mind, they must open their heart, and they must turn off that chatterbox in their head, because only then you hear what is being said.
Anybody know what the Johari model is? Johari? It's a window, and it has 4 panes of glass. And we all have this window. We're all behind it, looking through it at the world. The first pane of glass is clear. I can see Diane, Diane can see me. The second pane of glass isn't clear. I can see Diane, but Diane can't see me. The third pane of glass is also unclear. Diane can see me, but I can't see Diane. And the fourth pane of glass is opaque. And I used to say to kids, to young people, to students, whatever, this is where you are in class. I got you, you got me. There's some part of me you're never going to know. There's some part of you that's going to know things about me or think they know things about me that I don't know I'm communicating. That last window is what none of us know. And I remember saying it to a young man who said, I want to talk about abortion, but my priest said you wouldn't do that. And I said, you can talk about anything you want as long as you do it in this way. You give me information, tell me your beliefs, give me a chance to talk with you. You do anything. I used to say the cloudy window was my attitude toward guns. I've been anti-guns. I mean, there are limits. I've lived in the West for a long time. I understand bears on your porch. I got hunting for the most part. I got that. But those things should be locked up. The day they called me and said, do you know your husband has applied for 5 African posts and you'll have to do small arms training? I said, yes, sir. I'd do anything to protect my baby. So here's this cloudy window where I still will tell you I don't think handguns belong in your home and I don't believe in automatic weapons. On the other hand, I would have gone to gun school and learned how to fire a gun because I had a baby and I didn't really care how Carl defended himself, but I was going to take care of that kid no matter what. So here's the world out in these 4 panes of glass. And if you want to look at me and I want to look at you, it takes an awful lot of work and a certain amount of respect for everybody, no matter who they are.
What a great note to close on. Thank you again. So please come next week. We'll have Rita Gao as our presenter, and